started. All right, so sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to advance the slide. Okay, great. So if you are watching this, just know that we are going to only address tax issues related to what is called a non-resident for tax purposes. And so that is determined based on how long you've been in the US and what your visa classification is. So we're focused on students who are on F1 visas who've been in the US for 5 years or less, or a student or scholar who's on a J1 visa who've been in the US for 2 years or less. Also, please know that this information is just information, not legal tax advice. I am not a tax expert, and our tax compliance officer, Teresa Williams, she's not able to join us today, but she's also not legally able to give you tax advice because she does not work for you. She works for the college. But we have put together this presentation with some helpful samples, but also the link I sent to you on our web page has our tax information packet, as well as a guide to kind of determine which forms you likely need to fill out. All right, so my screen is taking a while to advance. Here we go. You may hear friends talk about e-filing. So for example, when I do my tax forms, I use the software, and the software files my income tax return electronically. For those of you who are non-residents for tax purposes and you're filing what's called the easy form, that's the form 1040 NREZ, or the 8843, you cannot file those electronically. The only form that you can now do electronically is the form 1040 NR. And you would only want to do that if you needed to file that form, because it's a more complicated form and is really meant for use in particular tax circumstances. So most of you should be able to do the 1040 NREZ. So the Internal Revenue Service, you'll hear me reference it. I think I already made mention, IRS, it's usually referred to. That's the taxation agency of our federal government. And that's who you're going to be reporting your taxes to, and also filing your return with. All right, so to get started, what we're going to do is just kind of go over some vocabulary, because the terms might be new to you and or complicated. So let's look at some of the tax vocabulary. An alien, which is just a weird term to use for anybody, but we do use that in reference to anyone who's not a U.S. citizen. Student will refer to anyone on a student visa of an F, J, M, or Q status, and a teacher or trainee who's not a student in the U.S. on a J1 or Q1 visa. So your compensation or earnings, these are wages or a salary or tips that you will have earned for a service provided to an employer or an organization. Income can also include wages, salaries, and tips, but it can also reference interest, interest earned through investments, dividends, and some scholarship, fellowship grants, or prizes and awards. And so that's where we're going to get into a little more detail on to figuring out if you have a taxable scholarship, fellowship, or grant. I already mentioned IRS. An income tax return, that's the term that we use for the statement that you file by an individual taxpayer. The withholding That's the estimate that your employer or the school will use to basically take some of your earnings, each paycheck, to withhold it and actually send it on your behalf to the IRS. So if you had taxable scholarship, you'll know that you were charged the tax, that is the withholding, the estimate that the school had to estimate based on your earned scholarship or fellowship, and then actually they're considered the withholding agency. So, and again, these are always estimates. That's why we do the return, to actually do the exact calculation. The U.S. source income is any income from a U.S. source. All right. So who has to file forms? That's what we're going to look at. So what we're talking about today is anyone on F or J visa. All of you will need to file at least one form with the IRS. Even if you did not have any earnings, any salary, any wages, any taxable scholarship, you have to file at least one form. So what's that form that you're going to file? The first one we're going to look at that applies to all individuals on F1 visas here in the US for 5 years or less, or J1 students or scholars in the US for 2 years or less. You all need to file the form 8843. So let's look at that. So, and again, this is where I say, don't panic if you don't easily have this form, sitting next to you. Don't try to do it. We're just going to look at, to be honest, how simplified this form is. It's really not challenging to fill out. It's just capturing information that you already have. So this should not require anything other than your passport to calculate or to determine the answers. So of course, the first thing will be your name, your addresses, both in your country of residence and in the US. And then part 1, where it asks for general information, this is where you're going to use your passport, and you're going to determine what visa you currently hold and the date you entered. And that would be the date you first entered with that status. And so this form, again, to remind you, it's only to be used for student purposes for anyone on an FJM or Q status. And then your current non-immigrant status. And why does it ask it 2 ways? That's because some students might have first come into the US as a tourist or a dependent of their parents' visa classification. So they might have had an E2 status, but now their current non-immigrant status is F1. And so if you did have a change, you see there 1B asks for both your status and the date that the change occurred. But for most of you, it's going to be the same, right? It's going to be 1A is going to be F1 or J1, and B will also be F1 or J1. And then of course you answer number 2 with the country or countries that you're a citizen of during the tax year, right? So you're always keeping in mind that your information is based on what was true in 2019. And then what country or countries issued you a passport might be different. And then your passport number for 3B. And then 4A is where you have to sit down and calculate information. So the 4A would be calculated by looking at all of your entries and exit dates from the US. So if you don't get stamps every time you enter your country, try to look back at flight information that you might have. And to actually count days, there are tools on the internet that you can put in a start date and an end date, and it will give you calculations easily. And that's the best and really most reliable way. So you're not sitting there with a calendar, but you may already know that. And then 4B is specific to the number of days in 2019. So you see that you're using to exclude. So part of the reason why you are asked for dates that you've been in the US is because what you're trying to establish is a substantial presence test to determine that you are indeed a non-resident for tax purposes. So when we finish this slideshow, I'm actually going to pull up a website, it's actually the IRS, where it explains the calculation to determine your substantial presence. And so I'll pull that up later. So for now, you're just putting those numbers in, those calculations. If we have any of our J1 professors online, this information, or this section rather, of the form would be completed by you. They don't typically join, so there's not sample information, but it would look like and be similar to this section, which is the student section. So for all of you students, this is how you will fill out part 3 of the form 8843. You see number 9 is the college's name and address of the school that you attended in 2019. Now, if you just came to Rollins in 2020, but you were a student at a previous institution, of course, you would put that information in. So again, it's where you attended in 2019. And then 10 requires the name of the director of the program. And for this purpose, you can just use my information, my name, and again, the school's information. So 11, number 11, you're going to enter any visas you held during the years referenced here, from 2013 to 2014. And again, they're only looking for F, J, M, or Q. You don't have to enter that you had a tourist visa during any of those years, which many of you probably have had. And then item 12 asks you for whether you were present in the US as a teacher, trainee, or student for any part of more than 5 calendar years. And that's where they're starting to very specifically ask you to determine whether or not you are a resident for tax purposes or a non-resident. If you have been in the US for more than 5 years and you answer yes, as you can see, it says you can provide sufficient facts on an attached statement to establish that you do not intend to reside permanently in the US. So sometimes our grad students have been in the US for 5, maybe 6 years because they did 4 years undergraduate and then an additional year or 2, and are currently in their last year of a master's. And so you can still claim to be a non-resident for tax purposes, but you would have to attach a statement, right, saying that you still have no intention to reside permanently in the US, that you are just continuing or have been continuing your studies. And then item 13, it just asks whether or not you took any steps to apply for lawful permanent resident status or have an application pending to change your status. The question often comes up is whether or not applying for the diversity lottery counts in items. So if you applied for and put an application in for the diversity lottery, the answer to this is no, because the diversity lottery is just a request for a chance to apply for permanent resident status, right? So it's not until your diversity lottery application is selected that you become even eligible for lawful permanent resident status, or eligible to apply for that status, okay? So you can answer no there, even if you did do the diversity lottery. And then there's a section for you to sign and date the form, and that is as simple as that. So 8843, every one of you would need to complete that form. And then you will make copies, and I'm going to give you some examples of how these dates were calculated. But later on in the slideshow, we're going to go over the address of where you're going to mail that form once completed. And again, just a reminder, if you joined after we got started, this presentation is being recorded and will be available for you to go back and listen again. We will put up both the recording and just the PowerPoint. So if you don't want to listen to my voice again, you can do that, and it'll be easier to skip through the slides. So when we were talking about the dates of presence in the US, here's the sample that was provided. So they just at that point were asking for days present in the US. So the example for Tommy the Tar, or Tommy Tar, vacationed in the US for 11 days and attended college for 235 days. So his total was 246. And that's what he's counting for 2019. Okay, so just a reminder, look at the dates in your passport, or you can go to your travel history in the I-94 record, which is your entry and exit record to the US. I would more rely on your own recollection, but also compare it rather with both your recollection, flight information that you have, and of course stamps in the passport, because the I-94 can sometimes have errors, as we know. All right, and again, we went over what to fill out in the section specific to students, as well as to teachers and trainees. All right, so if you did not earn any U.S. income, what form will you complete? And do you need to pay taxes? No, so you wouldn't have needed to pay taxes. However, just to remind you, everybody fills out the 8843, okay? So if you had no U.S. earned income, you're welcome to stay on the presentation, but we're going to transition into students who have earned income, whether that is through wages from employment or a taxable scholarship. So if your only obligation is Form 8843, you can certainly stay on, but probably it wouldn't be as relevant, right? So we are going to go over the address of where to send those forms at the end, but all of the information is available on our website. So if you're getting off the call, you know, reference back to this PowerPoint or look at the information packet, but always be sure that you are keeping copies of every document you submit. The 8843, if submitted by itself, if that's the only form that you're completing, is due June 15th. So you may have heard news reports that the government extended the tax filing deadline to July 15th. That is for tax returns that only include wages or earnings from employment, okay? If your only form that you need to do is the 8843, or if you have taxable scholarship, those are due, those forms are going to be due June 15th. So you still have plenty of time, and as you saw, 8843 is quite simple. So fill it out, keep a copy or a scan somewhere in your records, and then you need to actually submit it by hard copy to the address that we'll provide at the end. All right, so let's talk about FJ1 students who received only a scholarship or fellowship grant in 2019. So we're going to focus on just those earnings or those taxable scholarship scenarios, not for current, like this next slide or two is not going to reference earned wages. All right, so scholarships and fellowship grants are not included in taxable income if they are used only for what is called qualified tuition fees books, supplies, and equipment that's required of all students taking the course. And of course, if you're pursuing a degree. All right, so you have to look at the amount of your scholarship or fellowship and determine, did it cover more than those items listed, the tuition fees, books, supplies, and equipment? If any portion of your scholarship applied toward room and board or for any personal maintenance in exchange for teaching, that is when it becomes taxable. Now, some of you may have requested exemption based on a tax treaty. So you would have worked with Teresa Williams, our tax compliance officer, to determine whether there is a tax treaty. And so that you would know of in advance, and that might have exempted your what would have been taxable income from tax, because there are some agreements between the US and your home countries that can reduce your liability for taxes. If you're not sure of whether or not you have a tax treaty, there's a publication, I think it's the publication 519, that gives the details of each country that has a tax treaty and the details of that tax treaty, because they all look differently. And so we're going to show some examples coming up of tax treaty. Okay, so these are some examples of what might be a taxable scholarship or fellowship, right? So if you got a tuition waiver or room and board waiver, you might have received a travel scholarship. So we have international students who go abroad, and as part of that process, they're awarded a scholarship for that study abroad experience. That becomes a taxable scholarship. If you earned any sort of prize or award, you probably know you got taxed on it. And then any of our teaching or research assistantship stipends. So when you are performing work for that assistantship stipend, that is considered taxable. If you have a taxable scholarship, the college would have determined, if it came from Rollins, they would have determined the tax liability, charged your student account, and provided you with what's called a 1042-S. And I have some examples of those coming up. But that's how you would know both how much of your scholarship you earned or you were awarded was taxable, and how much they've already withheld on your student account. All right, so what do you file if you have a scholarship that's not taxable? Again, it's just going to be the 8843, right? So you have no other taxable obligation, right? You're not having to pay any tax on that particular scholarship. Now, if it's a taxable scholarship, you're going to still fill out the form 8843, but then you would also fill out either the form 1040NR or the 1040NR-EZ. If you have a taxable scholarship and you're also claiming a tax treaty benefit on that scholarship, it's going to be the same, the 8843 and the 1040NR or NR-EZ. And the reason we say that sort of differently is that you may have been able to reduce your entire tax obligation based on a tax treaty, and therefore you don't actually have to pay any taxes on what you earned, but you still must prove to the government through a tax return, you know, all of the information, right? Like you have to submit the copy of the 1042-S, which is the statement that the college would have provided you, where they say how much scholarship you were given and how much was the taxable amount, but also how much was waived from based on the tax treaty, okay? So you still have to, what we call, reconcile that with the government. And then if you have a graduate assistantship stipend, again, depending on the assistantship and what it's applied toward, you may also have to file the 1040 NR or NREZ. Okay, so then we're going to transition to also earned income and calculating its tax liability or tax obligation. So if you worked in 2019, you would have earned income, right? So you would have received a W-2 from the employer that said how much you earned and how much they withheld already, the estimated taxes that they withheld. So you're going to also be required to file Form 8843 and the 1040 NR or NREZ. All right, so I've been referencing some forms and form names. So the W-2, already mentioned at the beginning, that's the statement that you would have received from your employer that references your wages or your earnings and also the estimated taxes that have been withheld. The 1042S, as you can see on the slide, it's considered the foreign person's U.S. source income subject to withholding form. So that's going to be used if you had income being a scholarship or maybe even earnings. So if you worked on campus and you have a tax treaty that applies toward earnings from employment, you would also get a 1042S. And then it's also used if you had a taxable scholarship. So again, income not reported on the W-2, because remember the W-2 is for wages. And then also whether or not you had a tax treaty. I referenced the 1040 NR. Now this is the income tax return form. This is where you do the calculations to show the government how much you earned, and you attach, if you had earnings, you would attach the W-2 to the 1040 NR or the 1040 NREZ. Okay, so if you had no dependents, you're likely going to fill out the NREZ. If you had dependents, so that would be a spouse or children under the age of 21, you would have to fill out the 1040 NR. And the W-7 is for anyone who does not have a taxpayer identification number, which is usually going to be your Social Security number. So if you had employment, then you would have applied for and received a Social Security number. So that's going to become your taxpayer identification number. If you had income based on, so you had taxable scholarship, that's your only source of income, you wouldn't have been eligible for a Social Security number. However, to file the 1040 NREZ, you need to have a taxpayer identification number. So the government has what's called an ITIN, I-T-I-N, which stands for the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, and you would have to file for that using the form W-7. And if you need that form, or rather if you need that taxpayer identification number, you're going to need to work with our office, because our office will have to file your W-7 form along with your tax return on your behalf, because we become basically an agency verifying your identity based on your immigration forms that we have on record or that you produce in person for us. Okay, so we already talked about the W-2 or the 1042S. These are just your information forms. You don't write on them, you don't fill out anything on them, you leave them blank and you use them to reference when you're filling out your income tax return. And then you attach them to the 1040 NREZ. If you were at a previous school in another state, that state may also have state income taxes to file. Florida does not have a state income tax. So if you were only in Florida in 2019, then you shouldn't need to worry about a state income tax. So here's a sample W-2. So you can see on the form that the employee's Social Security number is listed, and item B is the employer identification number. So every employer in the country has such a number, and then information about the employer, name and address, and then information about the employee, name and address. And then item 1 is where the actual wages are listed, so $6,250, and how much that employer estimated and already withheld and paid to the IRS. The federal income tax withheld for that individual was $680. We're going to be using these in order to fill out some sample 1040 and REZs. But that's what and they may not look exactly like this because there's different versions. If the employer does a printed W-2, you will likely receive multiple copies because in the old style of getting paper, you would get paper copies for records, for filing with the 1040 NR-EZ with the federal return, as well as with your state returns. So if you had any taxable scholarship or filed a tax treaty, this is the form, the 1042S, that you would have received from Rollins. And so you see income code, and that's where it's determining, was this a scholarship that was taxable, and then what the amount was, and then if there was any tax withheld, and then you see some information, just again, name and address, and the recipient's date of birth. So you want to make sure that's all accurate. And that is going to be used then to calculate your earnings in the 1040 NR-EZ. All right, so keep in mind that, and I'll repeat, you don't need to do the 1040 NR or NR-EZ if you had no U.S. source income, or you don't wish to claim a refund of over withheld taxes. If entitled to a refund, you must file a return to claim it, right? So sometimes our students do the calculation, or they get a W-2 or a 1042S, and their calculation was that they had $10 withheld, but that they really shouldn't have had to pay that, but they don't, for their because they just don't feel like doing the form, they don't want to file for the refund. So, but if you want that $10 back, you do have to go through this process. All right, so itemized deductions. What the goal of filling out your tax return is to reduce your taxable income, right? So, let's say you're Tommy Tar and you earned that $6,250. You want to look for ways to reduce the amount that's taxable. And so deductions can be from charitable contributions, or if you already paid state or local taxes and they've become something that you can deduct from the taxable income. However, for tax purposes, you may hear your friends who are U.S. citizens talking about a standardized deduction. You are not eligible for the standard deduction, okay? So the only students that are eligible for standard deduction are Indian students, and not always, not in every situation. So keep that in mind. All right, so is any non-resident income exempt from taxes? Yes, okay, so if you maybe you got a statement from your bank indicating that you earned interest, and that would be for your own personal bank account, not for a business account. that interest that you earned is not taxable. I already mentioned the tax treaties. So actually, in fact, it's the publication 901. I mentioned the 519. I think they both reference tax treaties, but the more detailed one is, in fact, the 901. So you can go to the irs.gov website and look up to see whether or not you have a tax treaty. And again, that's going to reduce the amount that's taxable for you. So here's an example. China and the US do have a tax treaty. And you can see here that, the details of what is excluded, right? So the last line of that particular section references compensation, which again, that's earnings. For any foreign resident, you can earn up to the maximum amount of compensation would be $5,000. And what that means is that the first $5,000 of your earnings are going to be able to be waived and reduce your taxable income. Okay, so if you were Tommy Tar and you were from China and you had the $6,250 only, then you could reduce the tax to be applied only toward the $1,250 difference, right? So you reduce your income by $5,000, your taxable income. India also has some tax treaty. So you can see here, though, that it's a little bit different, right? So it references personal services, remittances or allowances, but it's not specifically on wages, okay? All right, so again, if you want to use the easy form, which I would suggest that you do, even though you can't electronically file it, the other one is more complicated and would misrepresent your tax status. So you're going to do the easy form if you don't have any dependents, you're not claimed on any other U.S. tax return. So if your parents are here in the U.S. and they're claiming you on their tax return, you can't file your own individual. If your income is less than 100,000 US dollars, if you're not claiming any itemized deductions, right? So I mentioned about the charitable contributions. If you're trying to reduce your taxable income, showing evidence of charitable contribution, you do have to fill out the more complex form, the 1040-NR. Individuals who received only wages, tips, and scholarship, and then miscellaneous other reasons. So that would be in publication 519. So let's look at the example, though, using the Chinese students form for Tommy Tar. So his 1042S, you may recall, mentioned exempt wages of $5,000. So in fact, my example earlier of reducing the $6,250 isn't his scenario. His scenario is that he got both a W-2 because the $6,250 was taxable, and he also had another $5,000 of wages that he earned but were exempt from taxes based on the tax treaty. So that's where the 1042S references the $5,000. And then he also received a scholarship of $8,000, but that was exempt based on the tax treaty. Okay, so he earned it. He earned the scholarship, but the college was able to exempt up to $8,000 because of the tax treaty. So here's his W-2. I already mentioned the $6,250. Here is the scholarship that he earned. You can see in number 2, $8,000. So that's the scholarship, and so the income code is different than the other example that we looked at. So this is income code 16, and again, that's for the $8,000 scholarship that he is exempting based on and already claimed the tax treaty on. The next one looks just the same, although I did advance. I'm going to, oops, go back. You see it's 8,000, and then the next one is the 5,000. That's the additional wages he earned from employment at Rollins, and then was able to exempt it because the tax treaty allowed for the exemption. Okay, so we're going to start with a 1040 NREZ. This is the form that you are filling out. Those three previous forms, the W-2 and the 1042S's, they're just your information and or reference forms. So you would fill out the first section of the 1040 NREZ, of course, with your personal information. If you are single, you're going to check off item number 1, or married, item 2. And this is where you're going to start plugging in information that you find on your W-2 on the 1042S. So you can see line 3, that was the wages that were found on the W-2, right? So the 6,250. If you had any taxable refunds, credits, or offsets of state and local income tax, that would be listed on 4. But these don't apply to Tommy Tarr. So for our example, we're just focusing on his particular situation. You see line 6, that's where you're entering any kind of income that was exempted by the treaty. So you remember Tommy had the 1042S's, 2 of them, right? One for 5,000, the other one for 8,000. So his total there in line 6 is the 13,000. And then you see the calculations are done in line 7 for all of the actual taxable income, the 6,250. And then you just continue through the calculations. So if you had any scholarship or fellowship grants that were excluded, or student loan interest deduction, and whether you can apply for them or not, you would need to carefully review the 1040 NREZ instruction packet, and they will give you the description of determining what each of these lines mean. So never just use the form by itself. You need to refer to the instructions packet. And we'll talk at the end about resources for filling this out. If your situation seems simple enough and you feel like you can plug in some information similar to Tommy Tarr's sample here, you can do that. But there are online resources, so we'll reference some of those at the end. But for many, doing the form on their own is too complicated, and so that's where I'd reference some online resources. I don't do my own taxes because I find them too complicated, and the software that is available certainly makes the process much simpler. But so you can see, based on some of these calculations, right, his situation remains that the taxable income ends up in line 14 to still be that 6,250. The next line is where you actually look up in the instructions packet what your taxable, or rather what the tax is based on your income. So we do have a page, and I'll show you that as we advance slides, where the tax table illustrates certain brackets of income, and for each of those brackets, what the actual tax is for that amount of income. So line 15 for Tommy, the amount is $628. All right, so that's all he has. So it ends up line 17, that's the total tax of $628. If you remember, on his W-2, the college withheld $680 already. So you put down 18A, becomes that amount that's listed on the W-2 as tax already withheld. So that means that you've already paid that amount. So you can see it's more than what you're supposed to pay. So line 17, just to repeat, that's how much you're actually liable for. If you overpaid, like in this scenario, you're going to get a refund. And so that's what you do the calculations in line 21 and 22 to determine how much you overpaid. Now, sometimes it's the opposite, right? So sometimes you might determine that your total tax is more than what you already paid. In that case, you would actually have to send in an additional amount and pay the government. So you can see in lines 23A through D, you're going to provide information about your bank account where the refund can be issued to you. I would highly encourage you to do that rather than a paper check at this point. All right. So then the next section of the 1040 NREZ is going to be just, again, similar information as you might have already put on the 8843, but you do have to provide it again. So information about your country of citizenship, whether you were ever a U.S. citizen. So follow that. I think it's pretty clear, what your information will be. But here you're actually going to have to put in all of the dates that you entered and exited the U.S. So you'll have to, again, look back at your passport to get that information. The next section then continues, again, similar information from the 8843, and whether or not you previously, item I asks for whether you filed previously. So if the answer is no, it's no, but if it's yes, then you have to indicate the year that you filed and the form that you filed. So Tommy's situation, he filed in 2018, the 1040 NREZ. And then it asks for any of your income that was exempt from taxes based on a tax treaty. So if you recall, when we looked at the China situation or Chinese government and US government tax treaty, there were tax treaty articles referenced in that table, and then the number of months claimed in prior years. So in Tommy's situation, he also claimed this, same amount or same number of months, and then the amount. So the 5,000 and the 8,000 are listed. And then it asks whether or not you were subject to tax in a foreign country on any of the income. So each of your governments, has different tax obligations, right? So I don't know what the current US law is, but for a US citizen working outside of the US, previously you were able to work outside of the US and earn income up to 2 years before the US government would start taxing that foreign earned income. But your countries are going to have different tax obligations. So you have to answer that whether or not you're already paying taxes on these earnings elsewhere. So I mentioned the tax table, right? So remember he earned 6,250. So his liability was the 628. So this tax table is in the 1040 NREZ instructions packet. So when you look that up, you can find it based on what your specific situation or earnings were. I already mentioned the taxpayer identification, so I'm going to skip that. And I mentioned that you would, if you needed one, so if you had a taxable scholarship and that was your only source of income in 2019 and you didn't have a Social Security number already, then you would have to get the ITIN, the Individual Taxpayer Identification, by filing the W-7 with our support. So if you have that situation, just email me, and then I can give you the list of everything I'm going to need for you to send to me in order for our office to then send it to the government. This is just kind of a review process, so you can look back at this slideshow or this presentation if you need the ITIN, the ITIN. This is everything you're going to need to submit to us, and it's going to actually have to be paper. So if you're out of the country and you're needing to file this, just communicate with me so that I can give you an address where to mail the documents to. So right? When are these forms due? I already made some reference to that. So if you are filing based on with only wages from or income from wages, then your extension is to July 15th rather than the usual deadline of April 15th. If you only had either just the 8843 to file, or your other income was only from scholarship that was taxable, then you have to file by June 15th. Okay. All right, so I made reference earlier for those that were leaving the call early that anytime you submit documents to the government, you need to make sure you keep copies of everything, okay? Not just the form that you're filling out, but also receipts. So you recall that if you had scholarship and that scholarship was able to be used for books or some sort of materials required of all students in that class, you want to always substantiate what you're claiming, right? So keep copies of the W-2, the 1042-S, along with any receipts for tuition or books if you're using them to either reduce your taxable income or claim them as a deduction. Always get proof that you filed in a timely manner. Okay, if you're out of the US, you're going to need to mail these documents, and you want to mail them in a way that you can get evidence of when they're received. So some sort of courier service where you have a tracking number is what I would recommend. All right. Here's the address that you're going to submit the returns to, and this is true of if you're filing the 1040 NR or NREZ, as well as the 8843, it's going to Austin, Texas. And this is if you have no payment. So the payment being if you didn't already have the tax withheld and you still owe, or if you didn't pay enough and you owe money, then you would not send it to this address. You would send it to this address in North Carolina. Okay. All right, so just also remember that irs.gov is going to be where you can access those specific forms. Now we have links, so if you go to our website, under current students, there's a tax obligations section of our website. Of course, I emailed that all to you. There's links to all of these forms that we talked about, so you can go in. They are fillable PDFs. So you should always use the fillable PDF so that there's no question about your handwriting. And then you do have to print that form and sign it. So you can't just, do, as I said, the e-file. You have to fill out the fillable PDF and then mail it. There is a customer service phone number that you can contact. If you're in the US, there's a toll-free number. If you're out of the US, you can call directly to the number there at the top. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get out of the sharing of the presentation, and I'm going to open up the chat. You can either text a chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask questions, because likely if you have a question, others will as well. But let me just first, before you start doing that, look at some of the questions that were in the chat function. Even if you have W-2 form, yes. So if you have a W-2 form, so everybody fills out the 8843, even if you also have to fill out the 1040 NREZ. So the W-2 is used to fill out the 1040 NREZ. The 8843 is for everybody. And then someone asks, what if you're a dependent? If you're a dependent of someone in the US filing and they're claiming you, then you wouldn't also file your own income tax return. And then Anna asks about the websites. So there are links to those websites. And then there's also, if you look through the information packet that's on our website, my best recommendation, especially if you have to fill out the 1040 NR or NREZ, is to use Sprint Tax, because there is a small discount available and the discount code is in our information packet. But they're going to make the process so much easier. You're literally going to be asked for the information that is on your W-2 or on the 1042S, and they're going to prepare the form for you, and you will print it and mail it. They make it, the way they ask the questions, they make it quite simple and clear to understand. Like I said earlier, that's how I do my tax returns, just because, you know, it can be difficult to interpret tax law. If you only have the 8843, I don't think that you need to use any sort of tax service. As you saw, that form is literally just biographical information and calculating dates in the US. So don't waste your money, you know, doing that form. Now, if you're filing the 1040 NREZ and using a software, then of course you should have the 8843 you know, prepared as part of that process using the website or using the online service. Let's see, another question. International student, non-resident that worked on campus would fill 8843, use the W-2 sent by the school. Yes, but I would use, Kenny, I would use the 1040 NREZ, okay, the EZ form. I don't think that you need to do the 1040 NR likely. I mean, I don't know all of your details, but when you go to our website, in fact, why don't I just open up our website here and then share that with you in one moment. Okay, so if you go to the International Student and Scholar Services website, under current students, I'm just going to navigate here with you, you'll see a link to tax obligations. So the tax filing guide will help you just kind of answer some questions. So are you holding F1? Yes, right? So you can kind of work through that guide to figure out which forms to fill out. Okay, so that's one resource on our website. And then the information packet that I was referencing is here, right? And it's, I'm not sure how many pages, it's a number of pages, but let me just show you. I'm gonna scroll down. So a lot of the information we covered is here as well. And then here at the bottom under tax resources and assistance, Anna, you asked about those resources. So here's the link to sprinttax.com/Rollins College. And right there above that, you can see if you use that code provided, you'll get a $5 discount. I mean, I know it's $5, but it's not much, but it's better than nothing. And it's up to 30 uses. So I think it's just certainly an easier way. At least that's my, you know, my recommendation. Let me go back to the questions asked. would only need to fill out 1042 if Rollins sent it to me because I had an on-campus job and income, but I didn't get anything. So Anna, you can find those forms in FoxLink. You should go in there and look for your W-2. If you had an on-campus job, you should have been issued a W-2, and that is available in your FoxLink. If you did not, you would only have a 1042 issued by Rollins if you had taxable scholarship or you already claimed tax treaty benefit. And if I don't think that form is in FoxLink, so if you had any of those situations, taxable scholarship or claimed tax treaty benefits, you would want to email Teresa Williams, and her email, send it to everyone here. Her email is there. So you could ask her for that 1042S. So again, the 1042S is just a reference form. The 1040 NREZ is the form you're going to fill out to file based on your on-campus employment wages. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me also say that, okay, a couple of things. We can't give you tax advice, but I can try to answer your questions either here now, or if you want, we can set up some individual WebEx chats, and I can answer your questions. I can't fill out your forms for you, and I can't tell you exactly what to put in each of the forms, but I can give you some information that should help. So we can do that as well, because I know like each individual student scenario is going to be a little bit different. So you can just email me and let me know when you want to get on a WebEx just and have a one-on-one conversation. What other questions do you all have? Was this helpful?
Hi, Jennifer. I actually have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, cool. Go ahead.
First one, do we have the slides somewhere that we can look at on the website?
Not yet. We were waiting until we had the workshop, but then this afternoon, Matthew is going to both post the PowerPoint by itself, but also this recording.
Okay, awesome. And that's going to be somewhere on the website?
Yeah, it's going to be right here. I'll show you on the website there where it says Tax Workshop 2020, PowerPoint coming soon. It's going to be there.
Okay. Thank you. And then also have a couple more questions. Yep. So first, I actually submitted the taxes online using TurboTax. I know I'm not supposed to.
Yeah.
So what do I do? Do I have to resend them, all the files in the proper way, physically?
Yes, you should.
Do I need to attach any letter or anything?
Yes, I would attach a letter and, just indicate that you misunderstood and you previously submitted using TurboTax, and that you're refiling based on, your non-resident status.
Mm-hmm. And then if I only did it this year and I didn't do it for the first 3 years, then I have to submit for all the 3 years prior as well?
Did you have earned income in those 3 years, or you're just referencing the 8843?
No, just the 8843.
Yeah, I would back file. And so I would say that to all of you on the call. If you didn't file the 8843 in previous years that you were here in FMJ or Q status, go ahead. There's not going to be a penalty for filing the 8843 late. Mm-hmm. If you had earned income and you didn't file, there could be a penalty. So, but you should still do it because it's part of your immigration requirements that you file and you follow all tax obligations. So backfiling the 8843 is always a good idea, because what happens is in the future, as you, if you want to stay long-term in the US and you file for either a work visa or eventually for permanent resident status, part of that review is going to see if whether or not you you met your tax obligations. Did you file every year? Did you file the appropriate forms and pay what you're required to pay? So it's always a good idea to get caught up. There are occasional times where there might be a fine for filing a form late, but it's better to pay that fine than to risk, you know, not getting a green card someday, right? So that is where, if you have the, if the issue is based on a W-2 or earned income and you're filing a 1040 NREZ for a previous year, I would definitely recommend using an online tax preparation service, because they'll also be able to calculate that fine for you so that you know that you're filing it correctly. The 8843s you can definitely do on your own for previous years. So what you'll do is, let me see here if I can navigate. Hold on, I gotta move you. I'm gonna go to the IRS website. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
And it shows IRS still? Okay. All right, so what you'll do is, let's see, you want 8843. Okay, so you're gonna go here to that form. Now, see to the left, so what you're gonna see is this year, right? So if you clicked on the 8843 there under current revision, that's gonna be for 2019. If you want a prior year, you have to click on the left, to the left, okay? And then you need to search, and I would recommend you do form 8843 2018, because it doesn't, I looked here the other day, it's not in chronological order. It could like show the 1990s form, so specify what year so you're not having to scroll through a bunch of old years. So there you can see you found the form for that year, because they are year specific. You have to use the correct form. Any other questions?
Yeah, just one last one. So if I'm getting scholarship and I'm getting both athletic and academic, I have to file those separately? Is it two different scholarships, or does it count as one?
You should have, my guess is that you have two different 1042Ss. Did you get those from the college that specify the two different ones, or did they merge them into one 1042S?
I don't even remember if I got one.
You need to, that's where I would either check your mail or your documents. These would be sent to you hard copy. I don't believe that Teresa is able to send you digital copies. If you're unsure, look through your email to see if you have an email from Teresa. That email, it's in the chat function there, T. Williams. Check through any hard copy mail you might have gotten. But then if you find nothing, then I would email her. Now, if your scholarships weren't taxable, right? So if they only applied toward tuition, then you won't have a 1042S, okay? Because it's not taxable, and therefore you don't have, if that's your only income, then you're not going to need to do the 1040 NREZ. Okay, does that make sense?
So if it's not taxable, then I don't have to do that 1040 NRZ? Easy.
Correct. That's correct.
Just the regular one?
Yeah, just the 8843. So the 1040 NREZ is only for taxable income, like if you had wages from employment or your scholarship applied to room and board. So anything over tuition or qualified fees.
And how do I...
I'll just give a really simple example. Let's say that tuition was $25,000 and your scholarship was for $20,000. It's not taxable because that $20,000 would have been applied first toward your tuition. and any room and board you might have had, you paid for, right? Like it didn't get, the scholarship didn't get applied to that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Is there any way I can
If the
confirm?
tuition was 25,000 and your scholarship was 30,000, then 5,000 of that would have been taxable. And then you would have gotten a 1042-S from the school.
Okay. So yeah, I'll probably have to check. And is there any indication that says whether the scholarship is taxable or just I have to figure it out by myself?
If it was taxable, you would have been charged the tax on your student account.
Okay. And there's records of that?
Yeah, you can log into your student account through FoxLink and see whether or not you were charged for an estimated tax withholding. You can also always email Teresa, right? So she will certainly be able to. Now, she might not get back to you right away. I know she has some tax filing deadlines due tomorrow. So if you don't hear from her right away, just give her a couple days. But, you know, if you're really unsure, then I would just email her because she's the one who calculates each student's tax liability.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Well, like I said, it's going to be posted on our website. You can certainly email me and we can try to set up an individual chat. And I hope you're all staying healthy and managing through these difficult times. We're here for you. The team is available through WebEx or email. And we look forward to seeing you back on campus as soon as it's safe to be there. All right. Thanks, everybody.